I still remember that evening, the one that changed everything. The sunset outside our kitchen window painted the sky in soft orange and pink, and the smell of freshly brewed tea filled the air. It was one of those calm evenings that made you feel grateful for life. Or at least, that's what I thought, before my husband looked at me and shattered 30 years of peace with just one sentence. "Laura," he said quietly, not looking me in the eyes, "I think I want a divorce." First I laughed. I thought he was joking, maybe trying to start one of those deep conversations about love and aging that couples sometimes have. But his face stayed cold, still and distant. My laugh faded into silence. "What?" I asked softly, my hands frozen over the teacups. He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and said the words that sliced right through me. "I've been feeling stuck. I want something new. Someone younger." For a second I couldn't breathe. The world around me blurred. The sound of the clock ticking, the rustle of the curtains, even the hum of the refrigerator. Everything felt far away. After 30 years of marriage, after raising 2 children, after sharing every dream and every heartbreak, my husband, Daniel, wanted someone else. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there numb. All I could think about was how we met. I was 22, a nurse working long shifts at the city hospital. He was a young architect, full of charm, ambition, and a smile that could melt stone. He used to bring me coffee during my breaks, talk about his dreams, and tell me how lucky he was to have found a woman like me. And now, 30 years later, that same man was telling me I was no longer enough. He avoided my eyes, muttering excuses about how he didn't mean to hurt me, how life had changed, how he wanted to find himself again. That phrase, "find himself," burned into my mind. I wanted to ask, where exactly did you lose yourself, Daniel? Was it in the wrinkles on my face, the gray in my hair, or in the quiet loyalty of a woman who gave you everything she had? But I didn't ask. Instead, I said only one thing. "Who is she?" He looked down. That was all the answer I needed. Her name, I later found out, was Emily. She was 28, the same age our daughter Sarah had just turned. She worked at his firm, full of energy, dreams, and the kind of beauty that youth carries effortlessly. For days I walked around the house like a ghost. Every corner, every photo, every memory whispered of what used to be. The laughter, the birthdays, the ordinary mornings that now felt like scenes from another life. My son called, my daughter came to visit, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. How could I? How could I tell my children that the man who taught them about love, loyalty, and family was ready to throw it all away for a younger face? One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the moon through the open window. I thought about leaving, about packing my things and walking away quietly. But then something inside me shifted. A quiet strength I didn't know I still had. For 30 years I had built my life around Daniel. My happiness, my identity, my sacrifices, all tied to him. And yet, at that moment, I realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being forgotten. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Daniel came down looking surprised that I was calm. He said awkwardly, "Laura, I didn't expect you to take it this well." I smiled faintly and replied, "Who said I've taken it at all?" He blinked, confused. I poured his coffee and said quietly, "You've had 30 years to find yourself, Daniel. Now it's my turn." He didn't know what to say. He just stared at me, maybe for the first time in years really looked at me. Not as the woman who washed his clothes or cooked his meals, but as a person he could no longer control. That was the first moment I saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not guilt, not anger, but fear. He realized I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to rise. And that scared him more than anything. That morning after Daniel left for work, I sat in the quiet kitchen with my cup of tea turning cold between my hands. The house suddenly felt too big, too empty, like every wall had heard his words and was now whispering them back at me. Someone younger. For the first time in years, I looked around and really saw the place I'd called home. The family photos, the old couch, the chipped mug Daniel once said he loved. Everything carried memories. But those memories didn't hurt me as much as I expected. They reminded me that I had lived deeply, honestly, fully. And maybe that was something he'd forgotten how to do. When Sarah called that afternoon, she noticed something in my voice. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." I hesitated. I wanted to say everything, to cry into the phone like a child. But instead I said, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about doing some changes around here." She laughed. "Finally. You've been saying that for years. Start with that kitchen curtain. It looks like it's from the 90s. Her laughter made me smile. Maybe that was the moment I decided I wouldn't let Daniel's decision destroy me. If he wanted to start over, so would I, but in my own way. That evening I opened my wardrobe, took out all the old clothes I hadn't worn in years, and filled 3 big boxes. I changed the bedsheets, lit a candle, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back had lines on her face, yes, but also stories in her eyes. I realized that I had spent 3 decades taking care of everyone except myself. The next morning I walked to the salon near the old bakery and asked the stylist to cut my hair. She hesitated. "Are you sure, ma'am? It's quite long." "Yes," I said. "Cut it short." When I saw my reflection afterward, I smiled. For the first time in years, I looked free. Later that week, Daniel came home late. I was sitting in the living room reading a book, wearing a new light blue dress. He stopped in the doorway, staring at me. "You cut your hair," he said, almost surprised. "Yes," I replied simply. "It was time." He nodded awkwardly and walked past me, muttering something about a work dinner. I noticed the faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine. Stung for a moment, but only for a moment. When the door closed behind him, I whispered to myself, "You can break my heart, Daniel, but you can't break me." Over the next few weeks, I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I joined a book club, started painting again, went for walks by the lake, and even met old friends I had lost touch with. For the first time in a long while, people asked how I was, and I actually had an answer that wasn't fine. But the real turning point came one Saturday morning. I was shopping for groceries when I ran into an old friend, Michael, from college. We hadn't seen each other in decades. He still had that same warm smile. "Laura," he said, laughing in disbelief, "you haven't changed a bit." I laughed. "Oh, trust me, I have. Probably more than you can imagine." We stood there talking for nearly half an hour about old days, about life, about how time changes people. He told me about his late wife, his grown children, and how he'd started volunteering at a local art center. His voice had that kind of calm that comes from someone who's been through storms and survived them. Before leaving, he said, "It's nice seeing you smile again. Don't lose that." When I got home, Daniel was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and said, "Where were you?" "Out," I said lightly. "Met an old friend." He frowned. "Old friend?" "Yes, Michael from college. Remember him?" His expression changed just slightly. Jealousy. For a man who was ready to leave me, he suddenly didn't like the idea of me having someone to talk to. That evening, he didn't go out. He stayed home, unusually quiet, pretending to watch TV but glancing at me every few minutes. I could almost feel the question swirling in his mind. Who was this new version of Laura? Why wasn't she falling apart? Why was she glowing when she was supposed to be broken? And that's when it hit me. Maybe he didn't expect me to survive without him. Maybe he thought I'd crumble, beg him to stay, promise to change, or blame myself. But instead I had found peace. I wasn't playing a game. I wasn't trying to make him jealous. I was just living. And it was terrifying him. That night when we went to bed, he turned off the light and said softly, "You've changed." I smiled in the dark. Maybe I finally remembered who I was before I became your wife. He didn't respond. But I knew those words would echo in his mind long after I fell asleep. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of silence that used to suffocate me before. This time it was peaceful, healing. I spent my mornings on the porch with a cup of tea and my evenings painting sunsets, listening to old songs and rediscovering small joys that had once been lost in routine. Meanwhile, Daniel seemed unsettled. The man who once carried himself with confidence now walked through the house like a stranger, unsure of where he belonged. He still met Emily, I knew that much. I could sense it in his distracted glances, the way he avoided my eyes, the sudden urgency to leave after dinner. But something about him had changed, a quiet restlessness, as if he wasn't sure whether he was walking toward happiness or running from guilt. One evening he came home late again. I was in the garden watering the plants. He stood by the doorway watching me for a moment before saying, "You've been busy these days." I smiled, not looking up. Yes. Life doesn't wait for anyone, does it? He didn't respond. Instead, he walked closer and said, "You look good. Different." I turned to him, my hands still wet from the hose. "That's because I stopped waiting for you to see me." For a second, his face tightened, as if he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just walked away, leaving me with the sound of my heartbeat echoing softly in the garden air. That night, I received a text from Michael. "There's an art exhibition next week. You should come. You'd love it." I hesitated. For 30 years, I had avoided things like that. Events, crowds, anything that wasn't related to my husband or kids. But now I wanted to say yes. Not for Michael. For me. When I told Daniel I'd be out that weekend, he raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Where to?" "An art show," I said simply. "With who?" he asked, his voice calm but his jaw tense. I looked at him, a small smile playing on my lips. "With friends." That word friends seemed to bother him more than anything else. He nodded, pretending not to care, but his silence said everything. The exhibition was beautiful, filled with laughter, color, and warmth. Michael introduced me to people who spoke passionately about art, life, and second chances. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about being admired, it was about being seen. Later that night, when I got home, Daniel was waiting in the living room. The lights were dim, the TV off. "How was it?" he asked. "It was wonderful," I said, slipping off my shoes. "I met so many interesting people." He frowned slightly. "Michael among them, I suppose?" I met his gaze. "Yes, Michael among them." He stared at me for a long moment. "You've really moved on, haven't you?" I shook my head softly. "No, Daniel. I've simply moved back. Back to the person I used to be before everything revolved around you." He didn't like that answer. He opened his mouth as if to say something but closed it again. He looked lost, and for the first time I saw the man behind the ego, a man realizing what he'd thrown away. The next morning he surprised me. He made breakfast, toast and eggs just like I used to make for him. "Peace offering," he said awkwardly, placing the plate in front of me. I smiled faintly. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said. "I want to." We ate in silence, the kind of silence that carried 1,000 unspoken words. I could feel him trying to bridge the distance, but I also knew he was still seeing her. It wasn't my job to fix him anymore. I had finally stopped trying. Later that week, Sarah came over. She noticed the energy between us immediately. "What's going on with you two?" she asked. I hesitated. Daniel looked at me nervously. For a second, I wanted to protect him, to hide his betrayal, but then I realized honesty was part of my healing too. So I told her everything. Sarah sat there in stunned silence, her eyes filling with tears. "How could you do that to Mom?" she whispered, turning to her father. Daniel didn't speak. He looked down, ashamed. Sarah stood up, shaking her head. "You always told me to choose loyalty over lust." Guess those words were easier to say than live by, huh? After she left, the house fell into a deep, heavy silence. Daniel tried to speak, but I raised my hand. "Don't," I said quietly. She needed to know. We all did. That night he didn't go out. He sat on the porch while I read my book. There was a sadness in his eyes, the kind that comes when a man realizes his choices have consequences far heavier than he imagined. Before going to bed, he said softly, "I think I made a mistake." I looked up from my book. "No, Daniel. You made a choice. And now you're seeing what it cost." He nodded, speechless. There were no excuses left. No easy words to hide behind. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his presence. I felt powerful. Because I finally understood, sometimes the most graceful revenge is not anger or pain. It's peace. A week passed since Sarah confronted her father. The house, once filled with chatter and music, now carried a heavy, echoing silence. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Daniel moved quietly, careful not to make noise, as though sound itself might remind him of his guilt. I watched him sometimes, not out of love but out of curiosity. The man who once carried so much pride now looked smaller, like his shoulders couldn't bear the weight of his choices. But that was no longer my burden to carry. My life, meanwhile, was beginning to bloom again. Every morning, I'd go for a walk in the park, greet strangers, feed the pigeons, and watch the sunrise paint the sky in gold. I started volunteering at a small community center where we helped elderly people with art therapy and storytelling. Those hours became my escape, a place where I felt useful, alive, and appreciated. Michael often volunteered there too. He had a gentle sense of humor that always made people laugh, and slowly, our friendship grew deeper. But there was no rush, no pressure. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company, both trying to rebuild what life had once broken. One evening after we finished an art session, he walked me to my car and said, "Laura, do you ever think about starting over?" I smiled softly. Every day. But not in the way people expect. Starting over doesn't always mean finding someone new. Sometimes it means finding yourself again. He nodded thoughtfully. Then I think you're already doing it. When I came home that night, I found Daniel sitting in the living room, staring at an old photo album. Our wedding day, our kids' first birthdays, family trips. He looked up as I entered. "Do you ever miss those days?" he asked quietly. I hesitated before answering. I miss the people we were back then, before time and ego changed us. He closed the album slowly, his fingers trembling. "I thought she made me feel young again," he whispered. "But now I just feel old. Empty." I didn't say anything. What could I say? There's no comfort for a man who destroys his own home and then misses its warmth. For the next few days, he tried in small ways to fix what was broken, cooking dinner, leaving flowers on the table, offering to join me on walks. I didn't push him away, but I didn't make it easy either. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal with gestures. It heals with time, and sometimes it doesn't heal at all. One Saturday morning, he asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market together. Like old times. I agreed, mostly because I was curious. As we walked through the colorful stalls, he tried to make conversation, but every topic felt like stepping on glass. When he reached out to hold my hand, I pulled it back gently. "Daniel," I said, "please don't confuse nostalgia with love." He stopped walking, looking wounded. "You really think it's over?" I looked at him calmly. "It's not about what I think, Daniel. It's about what you showed me when you chose someone else. You didn't just end our marriage that day. You ended the illusion that I was your forever." We stood there in silence as people moved around us, laughing, talking, living, like life didn't stop for broken hearts. And maybe that was the point. Doesn't? Later that week, Emily showed up at our doorstep. Yes, her. The woman who had unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, stepped into the middle of my life. Daniel wasn't home. I opened the door and she stood there, nervous, holding her purse tightly. "Mrs. Taylor," she began softly, "I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to apologize." I raised an eyebrow. For what? Falling in love with a married man. Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought he was unhappy. He told me you didn't care anymore." I smiled faintly. That's what men say when they want to justify breaking something precious. They turn the woman they betrayed into a villain, so they can feel less guilty. She wiped her tears. "We're not seeing each other anymore," she said. He ended it. That caught my attention. Did he? She nodded. He said he made a mistake. I thought you should know. For a moment I didn't know what to feel, pity, anger, or relief. But then I realized it didn't matter anymore. "Thank you, Emily," I said quietly. "But I don't need his guilt or your apology to heal. I've already started doing that on my own." She looked at me, perhaps expecting me to yell or insult her, but I didn't. I had no bitterness left to give. Before leaving, she said softly, "You're stronger than I thought." I smiled. "No, I'm just done being weak." That night, when Daniel came home, he looked nervous. "Emily came by," I said before he could speak. He froze. She told you?" "Yes," I said calmly. "And I'm glad she did." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Laura, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I want to make things right." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see my husband. I saw a man, flawed, fragile, human. You can't rewrite the past, Daniel. But you can learn from it. Just not here. Not with me. He looked stunned. "You mean you're leaving?" I shook my head slowly. "No. You are." For a long moment Daniel just stood there, frozen, as if my words hadn't fully reached him. "You want me to leave?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I looked at him steadily. Daniel, I gave this marriage 30 years of my life. 30 years of patience, loyalty, and love. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done trying to fix what you broke. He looked around the house, our house, as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on the framed photographs, the memories scattered across the walls, the warmth that once made this place a home. And then I saw it, that flicker of realization, that spark of regret that comes when a man understands too late what he's lost. Where am I supposed to go? He asked quietly. I don't know, I replied. Maybe you'll find yourself finally. Isn't that what you wanted? He opened his mouth to say something, but I turned away, walking toward the kitchen. My hands were steady as I picked up a mug and poured myself tea. For years I had trembled during arguments. For years I had cried behind closed doors. But now there were no tears left, only peace. He left that night. No shouting, no drama. Just silence, broken only by the sound of his suitcase wheels rolling down the hallway. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long while, listening to the stillness. And then I exhaled. For the first time in decades, the air in my lungs felt light. The following days were strangely quiet, but not lonely. The absence of his voice, his footsteps, his sighs, it wasn't emptiness anymore. It was freedom. I filled the silence with soft music, the smell of candles, and laughter from my new friends at the community center. One afternoon, Sarah came over. She looked at me, surprised to see how calm I was. Mom, are you okay? I mean, really okay? I smiled. I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm finally myself again. She hugged me tightly, whispering, You're the strongest woman I know. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of tea and thought about the word strong. It's funny how people say it like a compliment, but strength isn't something you're born with. It's something life forces you to grow when you have no other choice. A week later, I got a call from Daniel. Laura, he said softly, can we meet? Just to talk. Part of me wanted to refuse. But another part, the part that believed closure was a kind of healing, said yes. We met at the same cafe where we used to go in our early years of marriage. I remembered those days, when he'd reach across the table to hold my hand, when he'd look at me like I was the center of his world. Now his eyes were full of regret. I'm sorry, he said simply. I was selfish. I thought chasing something new would make me happy, but it only made me realize what I already had. I stirred my coffee slowly. And what exactly did you have, Daniel? He sighed. A woman who stood by me when no one else did. Partner. A home. I nodded. Then why did you throw it away? He didn't answer. Maybe there was no answer that could make sense. Finally, he said, If there's any chance to fix this, Laura, I'll do whatever it takes. I smiled gently. There's no fixing something that no longer exists, Daniel. But I do forgive you. He looked up surprised. You do? Yes, I said. Not for you. For me. Because carrying bitterness is just another form of being trapped. We sat there in silence for a while. He looked like a man trying to hold on to sand slipping through his fingers. And for the first time, I didn't feel pity. I felt peace. As we stood to leave, he asked softly, So this is goodbye? I looked into his eyes and said, No, Daniel. This is freedom. When I got home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, excitement for the future. Not fear, not sadness, but hope. I started planning a small art workshop for women who had gone through similar pain. Women who had forgotten how to see beauty in themselves. A few weeks later, that workshop became a small miracle. Every Friday, a group of women, widows, divorcees, single mothers, gathered in that sunlit room to paint, talk, and laugh. It was healing not just for them but for me too. We called it Second Canvas because life always gives you another surface to paint on no matter how torn the first one gets. Michael joined us sometimes, helping with supplies, cracking jokes, and making everyone laugh. I noticed the way he looked at me. Not with pity, not with rescue, but with respect. He saw the woman I had become, not the one who was broken. One evening after everyone left, he stayed behind and said quietly, You've turned your pain into art, Laura. I smiled. Maybe pain isn't meant to destroy us. Maybe it's meant to shape us. He nodded. So what's next for you? I looked around the room, filled with paintings, colors, and hope. Whatever I want, I said. The days that followed were eerily calm, almost deceptive. like the silence after a storm that has already uprooted everything. Richard had not returned since the night he walked out, and I hadn't heard from him except for a single text that read, "I need time." That was all. 2 words after 30 years. I kept myself busy, cleaned the house, rearranged the furniture, even started baking again. But the truth was, I wasn't trying to make the house prettier. I was trying to fill the silence. Every corner reminded me of our life together. The laughter, the fights, the birthdays, the quiet mornings with coffee. Now all ghosts of what used to be. One morning I walked into the bathroom and noticed the small hairline crack in the mirror. It had been there for years, but I'd never paid much attention to it. That day, though, I stared at it for minutes. The crack split my reflection right through the middle of my face. One side old and tired, the other side still trying to look alive. I ran my fingers across the line and whispered, "That's us." Richard broke in, but still here. Around noon, the doorbell rang. For a moment, I thought it was him. My heart leapt and I ran to the door, but it was only our daughter, Emily. She looked worried, holding 2 coffees and a brown paper bag of pastries. "Mom, you look pale," she said softly, placing the cups down. "Have you been sleeping?" I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, sweetheart." She frowned. "You're not. And Dad, what he's doing, it's cruel. But you don't have to face this alone." We sat on the couch as she handed me a croissant. I took a bite just to please her. "Emily," I said gently, "your father isn't cruel. He's lost. People lose themselves sometimes when they can't accept time. It's not about me being enough. It's about him not being enough for himself anymore." She didn't answer. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes. "You always make excuses for him." I smiled sadly. "That's what love does. It teaches you compassion even when you're hurt." After she left, I found myself drawn to the old storage boxes in the attic, the ones filled with our memories. I spent hours there dusting off photo albums, letters, and mementos from when we were young. There was a picture of us at the beach, laughing as the waves splashed at our feet. I could almost hear his voice again, that carefree laugh he once had before life wore him down. Then I found something unexpected. An unopened envelope tucked inside an old book. The handwriting was unmistakably his. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 5 years ago. It began, "If you ever read this, it means I couldn't say it to your face. I've been afraid. Not of you, but of becoming invisible to you. I see the lines on your face, the gray in your hair, and I love every bit of it. But when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize the man beside you. I feel smaller every day, less wanted, less needed. I don't know how to stop this feeling. Please forgive me if one day I act like I don't love you, because that might be the only way I know how to disappear." Tears blurred the words. I sat there frozen, clutching the letter to my chest. For the first time I understood. He wasn't running toward someone younger. He was running away from himself, from the reflection of aging that he couldn't bear. Later that evening I stepped outside. The autumn breeze brushed against my skin, and I watched the golden leaves drift down from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. Life, it seemed, didn't pause for anyone's heartbreak. That night I decided to stop waiting. I lit a single candle by the window, something I used to do when he traveled for work, as a silent promise that I'd be there when he came home. But this time it wasn't for him. It was for me. A promise to myself that no matter what happened, I wouldn't let bitterness define the rest of my life. As I blew out the candle before going to bed, I whispered into the darkness, "I forgive you, Richard, even if you never ask for it." And for the first time in weeks I slept peacefully, not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally let go of what was breaking me. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment my heart froze, that old instinct, the one that still hoped. I slowly walked toward the window, peeking through the curtain. It was him. Richard. He stepped out of the car looking older than I remembered, the confident stride replaced by hesitation, his shoulders slightly slouched as if the weight of regret hung from them. He held no flowers, no gifts, just a small suitcase and eyes that looked uncertain. I stood by the door for a few seconds before opening it. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," I replied just as softly. There was a long silence, the kind that's filled with 1,000 unspoken things. He looked around the house as if it was both familiar and foreign. "You changed the living room," he finally said. "Yes," I answered. "It needed some light." He nodded, glancing at the new curtains, the potted plants, the freshly painted walls. Everything was brighter now. Maybe that's what made him uneasy, seeing how life had moved on, even without him. "I didn't come to make excuses," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I hurt you. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for that. But I had to see you." I didn't respond. Instead, I gestured for him to sit. He hesitated before taking the seat across from me, the same table where we had shared countless meals, laughter, and arguments. He looked down, fidgeting with his hands. "I thought I wanted something different," he said. "I thought being with someone younger would make me feel alive again. But it didn't. It only made me realize how dead I already was inside." I looked at him calmly. "And what about her?" He sighed. "It ended. She wanted a future I couldn't give. And I wanted a past that no longer existed." There was a moment of silence. I could have screamed, cried, demanded to know why I wasn't enough, but I didn't. I had already burned through all my pain weeks ago. What remained now was acceptance. "Richard," I said gently, "you spent years chasing youth when you had something real. You didn't need someone younger. You needed to remember who you were. But you looked for that reflection in someone else, and lost yourself even more." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I know. And I hate myself for it. I thought if I could just start over, I could erase the feeling of getting old. But every day I woke up and it felt emptier. You were my home and I walked away from it." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I needed you to hear that from me." I stared at him, really stared, and for a fleeting second I saw the man I once loved, the one who used to dance with me barefoot in the kitchen, the one who'd leave love notes on the fridge, the one who'd promise, forever no matter what. But forever had an expiration date, it seemed. "Do you know what hurt the most, Richard?" I asked quietly. "It wasn't you leaving. It was realizing that after 30 years of love, commitment, and memories, I was still replaceable." He winced as if the words had cut him. "You were never replaceable. Then why did you try?" He looked down, defeated. "Because I didn't know how to love myself anymore. And when you stopped needing me for everything, I mistook that for you falling out of love. I was wrong." I exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of his confession settle between us. "We all change," I said. "But love isn't about staying young. It's about growing old and still choosing each other every day." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I didn't choose you when it mattered." "No," I said softly, "you didn't." He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table, our wedding ring, his half of it. "I couldn't keep wearing it when I didn't deserve it," he murmured. I looked at it, the gold now dull, the edges worn smooth by years of life. I didn't take it back. Instead, I whispered, "Keep it, Richard. Let it remind you that love isn't a youth you can chase. It's a gift you lost." He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "You always had a way of saying things that stayed with me," he said, forcing a small smile. "Even now." I smiled faintly. "That's because I speak the truth." As he stepped outside, the cold wind brushed past him. For the first time, he looked small, not the man who left, but the man who finally realized what he had destroyed. And I stood there watching, not with anger, not with longing, but with peace. Because sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's the moment you realize you don't need them to come back to feel whole again. The house felt lighter after he left, as though some heavy shadow had finally lifted. For the first time in years, the silence didn't ache. It simply existed. I sat by the window watching the afternoon sun spill golden light across the living room, painting everything in warmth. It was strange how peace could look so much like loneliness and still feel like freedom. Over the next few weeks, I began rebuilding, not the marriage but myself. I started walking every morning, the cool air brushing against my face, carrying away pieces of the past. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to started greeting me again. I joined a small art class at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but never found time for. I painted clumsy flowers and crooked skies, but they made me smile. One afternoon, Emily stopped by. She found me in the garden, kneeling beside a bed of fresh tulips. "You look different, Mom," she said, smiling. I chuckled softly. Different good or different bad? Different beautiful, she replied, her eyes glistening. It's like you've finally come back to yourself. I looked down at the soil, pressing my hands into it. Maybe I have, I said quietly. 4 years I lived as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caretaker. I forgot to be me. She hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you. Later that night, after she left, I sat at the same table where Richard and I had spoken. The ring he'd left behind still sat there, untouched. I picked it up, tracing the worn band with my fingers. For a moment, memories flooded back. The wedding vows, the laughter, the first home we built together. But now those memories didn't sting anymore. They just felt complete. I placed the ring in a small box and tucked it into a drawer. Not as a keepsake of pain, but as a chapter closed. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. The tree outside my window blossomed again, then shed its leaves once more. Time was moving, and for once I was moving with it. One evening, as I was preparing tea, the phone rang. It was Richard. His voice was quieter now, softer, humbled. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. For what? I asked gently. For not hating me, he replied. For helping me see what I couldn't. There was a pause. I smiled faintly. You don't owe me thanks, Richard. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't spend the rest of your life regretting what's gone. Learn from it. Be better. Not for me, but for yourself. He exhaled deeply. I'll try. Good, I said softly. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Anna. And that was the last time we ever spoke. That night I stood outside under the stars. The air was cool, and the world was quiet. I looked up at the sky and whispered a small prayer. Not for him, but for me. That I would continue to grow, to heal, to live fully, even with a few scars. I realized then that love doesn't always end with marriage. Sometimes love ends when you finally choose yourself. Months later, I hosted a small gathering at home. Friends, neighbors, Emily, and her kids. The house was filled with laughter again. Someone played music, and without thinking, I began to dance slow, clumsy, free. Emily laughed and joined me. Look at you, Mom, she said, spinning me around. And I laughed too, truly laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and untouched. In that moment, I understood something. Life doesn't wait for broken hearts to mend. It goes on. But if you're brave enough to face your pain, life rewards you with something greater than love, peace. When everyone left and the house grew quiet again, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The moon hung high above, calm and steady. I whispered softly as if the night could hear me. You wanted someone younger, Richard. But what I said and what I became left you speechless. Because I didn't just survive your leaving. I became someone even you wouldn't recognize. Not broken, not bitter, but beautifully whole. I took a slow sip of my tea, closed my eyes, and smiled. Sometimes the end of a marriage isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of self-love, the kind that never grows old. And that's the story I would tell anyone who asks how I found peace after losing everything. I didn't lose everything. I found myself. Did you enjoy today's story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I'd love to know which moment of the story touched your heart the most. If you like this story, you can support me by subscribing to the channel, so I can keep bringing you more beautiful and heart-touching stories like this. Thank you so much for your love, prayers, and support. I always look forward to reading your comments, because they're my biggest motivation. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I especially recommend for you. There are many more like these on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe. I'll be back in the next life story with a new tale, a new emotion, and a new lesson. With love and respect, goodbye.